From the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives, struggling to reach the time of the gathering, when the few who remain will battle to the last. No one has ever known we were among you, until now.
Welcome, Highlander fans, to Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. On this show, we cover everything in the Highlander universe. However, Highlander fans are mourning the loss of not only a film legend, but also a legend in the Highlander universe. Sir Sean Connery passed away on Saturday, October 31st, 2020. My name is Kevin. I'm one of your hosts here at Blood of Kings Highlander Podcast, and we are doing part one of two of a special tribute to Sean Connery. And with me, of course, always is my co-host, Mr. Lee Fillingsis. Lee, how are you, sir?
All things considered, I'm pretty good. Kind of a bummer we're doing two of these in 1 year. I hope I'm not a bad luck charm for Highlander.
I know what you mean. Well, we've had this wonderful gentleman on several times, and I also don't want you to keep coming on, John, when someone passes away in the Highlander universe. I promise we'll get you on something kind of fun, but I had to reach out to you, man. Welcome, John Mosby, the author of Fearful Symmetry, the essential guide to all things Highlander.
Thank you very much for having me. And like Lee said, it's a shame that this year has been so crappy. On that level, we've lost far too many people, on screen, off screen. I just want to get this year over and done with. Let's just 2020 in the rearview mirror would do nicely.
Yeah,
I think.
I hear you. I'm still getting over Eddie Van Halen's death, and now we got this one. But we wanted to do this now. First of all, it's therapeutic, but we wanted to definitely pay tribute to Sean Connery and the legendary character of Ramirez that he gave us in the two Highlander films. A little background here on Sean. Thomas Sean Connery, named Thomas after his grandfather, was born in Fountainbridge, Edinburgh, Scotland on August 25th, 1930. His mother, Effie McBain McLean, was a cleaning woman. Connery's father, Joseph Connery, was a factory worker and lorry driver. Sean's great-grandparents immigrated to Scotland from Ireland in the mid-19th century. The rest of his family was of Scottish descent. Connery said that he was called Sean, his middle name, long before becoming an actor, and they also referred to him as Tommy. His first job was a milkman in Edinburgh. At 1946, age 16, he joined the Royal Navy, acquired a couple tattoos, and unfortunately, he was discharged at the age of 19 on medical grounds due to an ulcer, but he did serve on the ship, the HMS Formidable. He returned to work, doing as a lorry driver, lifeguard, a laborer. He's also a model as well, an artist model. And then he began bodybuilding at age of 18. From 1951, he trained heavily with Ellington, a former gym instructor in the British Army. While his official website claims that he placed third in 1950's Mr. Universe contest. Connery was a keen footballer, meaning that he loved soccer. He played for a while. He got offered a contract, but decided not to. He wanted to do other things, and that led into acting. 1950s, he started doing some acting. He helped out at the King's Theater in late 1951. He did a bodybuilding competition. He heard about auditions for South Pacific. He landed a small part, and then he got a bigger part. And then while in Edinburgh, Connery was targeted by a gang. This is interesting. One of the most violent in the city. He was approached by them in a billiard hall where he prevented them from stealing his jacket. He was later followed by 6 gang members to a 15-foot high balcony where Connery launched an attack single-handedly against a gang member, grabbing him by the throat and another by the biceps and cracking their heads together. From then on, he was treated with great respect by the gang and gained a reputation as a hard man. Connery first met Michael Caine at a birthday or at a party during production of South Pacific in 1954. And of course, the two later became friends. Well, we got the news, unfortunately, that he passed away on Halloween this year. And the link that I found that I first saw was from the BBC and said that Sir Sean Connery had died at age 90. The Scottish actor is, of course, best known for his portrayal of James Bond. And said that Sean died peacefully in his sleep in the Bahamas, having been unwell for some time. His son said his acting career spanned 7 decades, and he won an Oscar in 1988 for his role of the Untouchables. Jason Connery said his father had many of his family who could be in the Bahamas around him when he died overnight in Nassau. Much of the Bond film Thunderball had been filmed there. He said, "We're all working at, understandably, this huge event as it only happened so recently, even though my dad had been unwell for some time. A sad day for all of those that known him and loved him. My dad was a sad loss for people from around the world who joined the wonderful gift he had as an actor." Nancy Seltzer, the publicist, says a private ceremony followed by a memorial has yet to be planned, but will be once this virus has ended. He leaves his wife, Micheline, and sons, Jason and Stephanie. Current James Bond, Daniel Craig, said that Sean was one of the true greats of cinema. Sir Sean Connery will be remembered as Bond and so much more. He said he defined an era in style. The wit and charm he portrayed on screen could be measured in megawatts. He helped create the modern blockbuster. He will continue to influence actors and filmmakers for years to come. Dame Shirley Bassey, who sang the theme song to 3 Bond films, including Goldfinger, paid tribute, saying, "I'm incredibly saddened to hear of Sean's passing. My thoughts are with his family. He was a wonderful person, a true gentleman, and he will forever be connected by Bond." He was knighted by the Queen at Holyrood Palace, just outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, in 2000. In August, he celebrated his 90th birthday. John, I want to ask you your immediate reaction to Sean Connery's death.
I mean, it's a life well lived. He was a controversial guy. Nothing controversial about his acting skills. He obviously was 90, and I think people had suspected for a while he'd been in bad health. So it's not so much a shock as a milestone, a marker. He is. People keep saying he's an icon. That's a word that's used probably far too frequently nowadays for just about anybody, but it's one that fits him. There are very few actors, I think, that can do what he did, which was effectively turn up and be variations of himself. And I don't mean that in any disregard, but almost every role you heard, Scottish accent. Doesn't matter if he was a Russian submarine commander, or an Egyptian peacock, Spanish peacock. He retained that actor, and there's very few actors with that innate charisma that could have done that and still deliver a powerful performance. Maybe him, maybe Jack Nicholson. I think those are about the only two I can think off the top of my head that have the ability to turn up, be a variant of themselves, and still be compelling. He was a different era, as I say. A very complex, interesting guy. Didn't suffer fools gladly. I don't think he ever courted controversy, but he was somebody who had very strong opinions, whether you like them or not, but never a doubt about his performance. He was compelling every time he went on screen. And, he decided, that after, I think it was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I don't need to act anymore. And he didn't. So he didn't. And there's very few people in a position to do that.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. He definitely commanded the screen every time. Lee, what was your initial reaction to hearing of the passing of Sean Connery? Iconic.
Well, I heard about it from you. I woke up. I had been filming overnights for a week, and woke up to go drive home, and I see the message from you. And I went to, check the old interwebs, make sure you're right about that. And I had the car ride home to just kind of think about, the impact that he's had. And, John summed it up. Sean Connery is Sean Connery, but in every role, he is that role. I mean, you believe him as John Mason in The Rock. You believe him as Marco Ramius in The Hunt for Red October, one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. And every time, he comes in as King Richard with a Scottish accent, and Richard would have only spoken French in his whole life, so he really was as far from a Scottish accent as possible. Yet he is Richard, he is Arthur, he is all these people. He's I forget his character's name in The Untouchables, but yeah, she's walking around the streets. This is the Chicago way. Like, nobody in Chicago says Chicago, but he got an Oscar for it because he could be himself and other people. And you're like, hey, there's Sean Connery for about a minute, and then you're invested in however he played his character, which is pretty remarkable. The closest thing we have now is The Rock, but he really only plays The Rock.
Right.
He doesn't play those other characters.
Yeah, I was beside myself. I mean, honestly, I remember when we celebrated his birthday on Bloody Kings, and all Highlander fans did in August, and 90. Yeah. I mean, that's a good life, so I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt, because we are as Highlander fans, we are invested in Ramirez, and we love the character that he played in that. And, and then of course I started looking back at everything else that he was in that made a huge impact on me. And, I knew that I had to do something about it, and podcasting about it is therapeutic for me. And that's why I appreciate that you guys are here. But let's talk about, a little bit later, we're going to talk about the other films that we like and such, but I want to talk about the impact that he had on the Highlander community as Ramirez. We can go back and look at Ramirez's, take or his history. You can go on Highlander Wikipedia and check elsewhere. Before he became Ramirez, his name was Takne, according to Highlander Wikipedia, born in 1896, British or BC. And, when you throw in all the TV stuff that kind of added history or rewrote it, or you look at Highlander 2 and how it it changed to be the director's cut or to appease fans, however you want to do it. There's a rich history here of him, and to where we first see him die, of course, in the first Highlander film by the Kurgan. And we learn a little bit about his history and his wives, and and so on and so forth, and about his sword as well, which is always interesting to learn about. But I wanted to ask you, John, before we choose kind of our favorite moments from the movies and such of as Ramirez, from what you have learned about his past, whether it was through the movie directly or through the fan fiction or the Wikipedia stuff or whatever. You've written a book called Fearful Symmetry, the essential guide to all things Highlander. So I know you've touched on it as well. And you got a copy there. I got a copy here. Wait, hold on. Are these the rare unsigned ones?
These are the rare unsigned editions, yes.
I wanted to get your thought on the character itself of Ramirez.
I mean, it's a character. I mean, we're talking sort of mixing real life and the fictional side of it. You obviously had a Scottish guy playing a Spaniard, a Frenchman playing a Scot. So essentially, the character, when we first meet him, really shouldn't work in some ways from all the exterior stuff, the real world stuff. But Connery gives it such a kind of, I think the mixture of the character and Connery allows it to be enigmatic. There's so much potential there. I think we've talked about this before about if the Highlander reboot ever gets off, who would play Ramirez. There is such innate interest and charisma and potential in that character that I don't know if anybody's ever sort of made anything definitive beyond what's in the beyond what was in the original film and Highlander 2. So it's interesting that the character is so rich in some ways for exploration. Connery gave it that nobility Here was somebody who, as a character, you could imagine having a rich history, which was never really explored on screen. As you say, it's always been kind of off screen, maybe unofficial, or maybe sort of kept at arm's length. But it's just a shame in some ways, because there was so much potential for that kind of character, for a character with that kind of charisma, portrayed on screen originally by an actor with so much charisma, but with such a rich mythology. And for me, I think the one thing that Highlander maybe missed an opportunity on was maybe even the series having just having a few more references. Nobody would have been able to afford Sean Connery even for 30 seconds for a TV show, but it would have been very interesting, I think, if we'd had some sort of story or mythology that became
like someone that knew him someone that knew him personally, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been very interesting to explore the mythos, the side of it and stuff like that, and maybe have a story arc or something where there is some connection to something Ramirez did or did. I always thought that would have been a great storyline to do, because there are so many gaps. We know some concrete blocks along the way, but there's so much in between. So as a character, very rich for exploration. I'm kind of surprised there isn't more fanfic out there. I know there is some, but it's never been massive. It's often concentrated on the main characters we've seen in the series and on screen, but not a huge amount for Ramirez.
That's a good point. Yeah. Lee, I wanted to ask you what you know of the backstory of Ramirez himself. What was always your take on that?
I mean, originally, I had the same reference points that you did from the first movie, and then, Zeist. No, it's the past from the second movie. That kind of gave it, there's really no continuity that really works for that version of the story.
Right.
But it does kind of set up the friendship, and I think it really did give a lot of reason for Ramirez to be back. I think that he really enjoyed his time on Highlander 1, and just coming into Highlander 2 like that, I think really made it without his inclusion, that would have
there we go. We're back.
Sorry, we just lost John for a sec. Good, you're back. Lee was just giving his thoughts on the character of Ramirez.
We do have, was it Graham Ash kind of saying, I taught that move to Ramirez, and, kind of have that throwaway line in there. And then I remember some kind of short animated thing. I think it was Flash animation in the 90s that had kind of the story of Takne. It was interesting, for the time it was good. I was trying to find it today and just couldn't, but I remember enjoying that. And I think that this is one of those stories kind of like Han Solo. Like, if you put anybody else in it, people aren't going to like it, even though I really like Solo.
Right.
I think that it needs Sean Connery. I don't think that anyone could have been Ramirez in the universe that we know,
right,
in any other way. And it would have been tricky, but I think, we've mentioned it, I mentioned it, John mentioned it. He immediately inhabits it. And how many men can look that manly and awesome in the Highlands of Scotland wearing crushed red and kind of violet velvet and giant peacock feathers, not only in his hat, but his cloak?
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a certain level of confidence and swagger.
The only people who could pull that off are probably Sean Connery and the three of us, I think.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, it's almost at the point right now, if this reboot ever does happen for Highlander, they'd almost have to kind of, reinvent the character of Ramirez, just so no one's trying to copy him. Someone has to kind of make it, or, either that, give him a different name. But yeah, that's a good point. Well, let's get into our favorite scenes or moments from Sean Connery in Highlander and in Highlander 2. And I just want to put this out there first, is like, I know that Highlander 2 for most fans is not a good place for a lot of fans. I myself have defended it. I enjoy the Highlander 2 special edition, which is that special cut that doesn't include Zeist. but it was special effects, and there's like a whole new scene that was filmed 5 years later, and stuff like that. And one of the reasons why I love Highlander 2 is because we do get Sean Connery back, and personally, I don't really care about all the minutia on how he was able to come back. It's written for a reason, and fans have clarified what and how and blah blah blah. I really don't care. It's Sean Connery back as Ramirez having an adventure with his buddy Connor, and there's some wonderful moments in there between those two. So yes, that's why I want to include Highlander 2 in this, because to me, it is the highlight of Highlander, being able to see him in there. So, John, starting with you, what were your favorite moments and or scenes with the character of Ramirez?
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Highlander 2, because in some ways, those two scenes with Ramirez and Connery, the one on the stage, where he lands in the middle of a Shakespearean production, is great. The bits within when he's getting the outfit done in the tailors. I mean, you can tell that Connery probably had a hand in rewriting some of the bits in there, and how stuff was written especially for him. So those were kind of fun, silly moments. Almost any scene in the original Highlander with John Connery in it, it's very hard to distinguish one that's clearly the ones where he's having the most fun. And it's very easy to sort of tell when he's got that smile, when the character himself is having fun, as well as Connery. And I know it was sometimes a turbulent shoot and everything, but there's clearly moments where he's enjoying himself. Probably looking at the checkbook just before. Yeah, okay, now I'm in a good mood. But yeah, I think almost any scene in Highlander works and benefits when Connery's on screen.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, even though I'm not a fan of Highlander 2, the bits where Connery, is clearly having fun being Sean Connery. If I'm coming back for this, I'm going to have fun. I think we're pretty good too.
If you had to pick one scene in the original Highlander with Ramirez, what would be your favorite?
I think it would be. I mean, it's some of the earliest scenes that we've seen. Just his arrival is always a memorable for me. But also the conversations he has with Connor about the practicalities of not falling in love and because you're going to lose people.
Right.
So actually, yeah, I mean, the moment he arrives is the one I always remember. The first scene when he makes his entrance as only Sean Connery can.
Yeah, he interrupts some love making there. I mean,
do you mind? Surely some mistake there. It's it's just from the moment he arrives, it's very hard to put one scene, but his arrival is just like, bing, I'm here. We can start now.
Yeah. That's a good one. What about you, Lee? What were some of your favorite Ramirez moments in Highlander 2?
Well, I think, the scene John just kind of referenced where he's talking to Connor about the reality. You must leave her, brother. The weight of that scene is given so much more power because of who we see him to be. When he's chit-chatting with Heather, kind of flirting with her a little bit, he's like, so I swung in through the window and found I was in the wrong room. Oh, what did you do? Well, I introduced myself to the woman who was in the room. She was most accommodating, and then he's flirting with the girl on the airplane as they're watching the video in Highlander 2, and he's like, dark-haired women like to, and we all know what he said, and she's just laughing, and he is this bon vivant. He truly loves life. He obviously enjoys so many things. He's not the recluse that Connor became, and he's not the chaotic barbarian that the Kurgan became. He is Fitzcairn. He is that guy that truly does love life, and that you must leave her, brother. That's despite all of the sorrow that he's been through. When he lost his first wife. He's trying to get Connor not to have that same pain, right. And I think that adds to Connor, being alone for so long. We do kind of get some of that retconned a little bit with Highlander 3, but he just stays there. And then there is nothing more fun, I think, in the entire of those two movies than Connery getting the suit. Sure, bloody well does understand it, sir. Would like a suit of clothes by 3:00, and he hands him a pearl earring out of his ear. Like that is the ultimate baller move. Like, here, just take this earring and make me clothes now.
You make me proud, Lee, that you just threw a bunch of Highlander 2 stuff out there. I like that because it's interesting. I think many Highlander fans have not revisited Highlander 2 because they've had this first or second impression and then they've kind of given up on it. And I discover all these little things about it every time, and I love those. He does kind of have a Fitzcairn thing about him, specifically in that second movie. He's happy to be alive again, and whether he's flirting with the ladies or meeting up with Connor in his loft, and then meeting Louise and all that kind of stuff. And I love when they get all shot and they're comparing how many times who got shot the most.
Yeah. Oh, and there's one thing I thought of when he sees his. Oh.
Sorry, what was that, John?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you've said, and I agree, that nobody could play the current Highlander universe's Ramirez other than Connery. It would have to be somebody else different. But if you extrapolate that up, I would be fascinated with a Ramirez TV series. I don't think that's ever been discussed, but there's so much potential there. It would have to come after a reboot because otherwise you've got Connery's baggage and stuff. But if they managed to do something with that, I would instantly be salivating over him because it's just, again, it's like a mythos. There's so much potential there.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I'd like that. Leah, did you want to finish your thought?
Oh yeah, the scene where he sees his face on the giant television screen. Such a great acting choice because, I mean, the go-to would have been like, oh my God, what devilry witchcraft is this? But he's been around so long, and well, technically not around so long, that just seeing something like that would have been like, oh man, this is really cool. And it just shows the age and like the wisdom of Sean's acting choices in that.
Right.
That he didn't, pretend it was witchcraft. I really liked that take on it.
Yeah, that's a good one. My favorite scenes, I think, are obviously more in the original Highlander 2. And one of my favorites is the beach running scene, and having been to the beach myself with my fiance and kind of reenacting that too. I love that whole scene. And of course, the training montages as well and stuff like that. But I wanted to ask you, John, did you have any favorite quotes of Ramirez?
I mean, Lee just with his talking about the quote about going to the window and stuff. That was just any time when Ramirez is having fun and Connery is having fun with his image and reputation. Now you put me on the spot for particular quotes, but I mean, it's any of those scenes in that first movie, especially, and maybe a little limited to say in the second. But he's just when he's having fun. There's that smile, It's just you don't know whether to take him. He's a character. He's an actor of great gravitas. You suspect, even with the limited knowledge you have when you're watching Highlander for the first time, that there is weight to that there is the Fitzcairn quality of mirth, but there's probably great tragedy, and you have that. His ability to whatever sentence is put in front of him to be able to channel both. So I can't pick out a specific quote, but the one that Lee was saying there is one I always remember with a smile because again that sums the character up.
Did you have a favorite quote of his, Lee?
Yeah, I just looked it up. Most people have a full measure of life, and most people just watch it slowly drip away. But if you can sum it up at one time, in one place, you can accomplish something glorious.
Oh,
nice. Highlander 2 for you too. So
I love that. That's good. Yeah. See, people need to go back to Highlander 2. Give it some love. I like that. The one line that always jumped out at me that I liked, because to me it kind of felt like it was almost like a line to fans, like you really don't really need to know all the answers. When he goes, "Why does the sun come up? Or are the stars just pinhole in the curtains of night?" And just, you don't really need to know why we are who we are. It just is, and that's one of my favorite lines. I've always enjoyed that. We're going to take a quick break, and then we come back. We're going to talking about our favorite Sean Connery movies that he did and talk a little bit about his career. But first, we're going to take a little break here on Bloody Kings, let you know what other great podcasts are here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to the Fandom Podcast Network and all of the other awesome shows we have to offer. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture news podcast. Bloody Kings, our Highlander podcast. Couch Potato Theater, our podcast celebrating our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite pop culture topics. End Zone, the NFL podcast. Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville podcast. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. Lethal Mullet, a 1980s and 90s action film podcast. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And our newest show, Making Treks, a new Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is also on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom. All right, welcome back to Blood of Kings, Highlander Podcast. We're doing part one of our Sean Connery tribute with very special guest here, John Mosby. I wanted to, we had a lot of fans on Bloody Kings talk about a lot of their favorite moments, in Highlander with Ramirez, and also talking about a lot of their favorite movies that Sean Connery was in. And I'll get into that in just a second, but I wanted to ask you first, John, what were some of your favorite movies that Sean Connery is in? Do you remember the first one you saw as well?
That's difficult. I mean, the most memorable ones are later in his career. I kind of discovered Sean Connery later in his career, and then I would go back and see some of the earlier ones. I mean, the first ones I remember, which certainly weren't the first ones I saw, but the ones that stick were things like The Untouchables. Highlander was always there. I saw a lot of the oldest Sean Connery enough to sort of been around old enough to watch it when he was playing it for the first time. So I guess the Bond movies would have been the repeats of the Bond movies would have been my introduction to him. But right. I'm trying to The Untouchables, it was always the one I go to as one of my earliest memories of watching, even though it's clearly it's kind of in the middle of the latter part of his career. But that's one I always, when somebody says Sean Connery, other than Highlander. What were some of your other favorites once you kind of discovered him and started watching his movies? The Untouchables, Hunt for Red October. I love Robin and Marion was perhaps one of the early ones as well, which is just that lovely take on the twilight days of the Robin Hood legend, which was fantastic in so many ways.
Audrey Hepburn as Maid Marian was perfect.
Indiana Jones, his contribution to Indiana Jones. I'm not the biggest fan of First Night, but I went to do some press with the cast for that, so that's kind of a memorable thing. Valentine Pelka obviously was in that as well, another Highlander alumni. There's so many. I mean, The Rock. I did some stuff. For I've gone blank on the name, but he played Draco the Dragon for Robert
Dragonheart. Dragonheart. Yeah.
And I was dragging something. I was going Dragonfire for some reason. Dragonheart, which was great just because again they had a CGI dragon that you just knew was Sean Connery. I mean, it wasn't just the voice; they had the face slightly modelled as well. So it was just that you never knew what he was going to do next, and sometimes you could tell sometimes that it's one for the heart, one for the wallet, as it is with a lot of actors. But I know various people that I spoke to over the years when I was doing the Highlander book and other times said that Connery was a guy that never had to, after the first half of his career, never had to do a movie. He would do the movies he wanted to do either because he passionately believed in them or because somebody, basically, said, here's a noodle, here's what you're worth. And often a combination of the two. So there's such a rich quantity of really good movies that are either top level quality or essential guilty pleasures. So I never got tired of seeing what he was going to do. If a film had Sean Connery in, there was Family Business, another one, an underrated one. There was so many things where you just go, what's he going to do? This is not going to be a bad movie if Sean Connery is in it. It may not be the best movie you've ever seen, but chances are he's going to be the best thing in it. And I think the only one I was disappointed with was probably League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which had so many problems that even Sean Connery couldn't save it. But otherwise, I don't think I ever saw a bad Sean Connery movie.
Gotcha. Lito, what about you? What were some of your favorite Sean Connery films outside of Highlander?
Well, I mean, it's impossible not to talk about Hunt for Red October. That was, I think I was 10 or 11. That was like the first grown-up movie that I watched that I really got, instead of like, oh, big boom, whatever. Like it was cerebral. It was just amazing. And, visually absolutely amazing. The first one I ever saw though was Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, and he plays the Green Knight, shows up in King Arthur's court, and he's like, okay, whoever can kill me by cutting off my head wins my armor. And, just a very cool one. And, I saw that one, and at about the same time, I saw the Time Bandits, and yes. I saw both of those about 20 minutes from where John is living right now, at my grandma's house. I picked those up at the video store, but just some really great stuff. I love The Rock, even though it's schlock and it's kind of crap, but it's amazing.
It's so fun. And he's good in that. He really is.
Yeah, and in that one and in Hunt for Red October, he has this way of he twists. He goes from being kind of this hard ass to having an insightful question, and it throws people off. After Nicolas Cage says Carla was the prom queen, he just gives this eyebrow. Really? He's like, I didn't expect that of you. In Hunt for Red October, he's looking at Alec Baldwin. As they're playing chicken with a submarine, he's like, "What books? Excuse me, what books did you write?" And he's like, well, I talked about Bull Halsey. He's like, oh, I read that. You were wrong. Bull Halsey was an idiot. And he's just having this conversation, playing chicken with another submarine. And he just plays it off so well. And then there's, Family Business. So good, when he gets convicted and he looks at the judge, hey, you bald-headed prick, don't you ever get caught on the tape? Because if you wind up in any joint I'm in, you'll leave feet first. Just what a great way to get sent away for life. And the one that stands out to me now is Finding Forrester, because of how nervous and small he was able to play.
I've never seen that film, and when I was asking our friends in the Bloody Kings group, there was a lot of people that were shouting that movie out. I'd never seen it.
It's such a departure from a Sean Connery character. I would say this is the one where he's not Sean Connery, except maybe Darby O'Gill in The Little People. These two are the least Sean Connery roles I can think of, and they're separated by 30 years.
And that was a good, because it was it couldn't be described as a comeback ever for Sean Connery. He didn't need to. But if I'm remembering rightly, that was about 2 or 3 years after the Avengers, not the Marvel movie, but the one based on the British, John Steed, and Emma Peel and stuff, which was probably, I said League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was, probably the only bad movie. No, that was terrible. The Avengers movie was terrible on so many levels. But that was, I don't think he particularly cared about that. And, everybody just went, oh, it's Sean Connery. He'll his next movie will be great. And Yeah, it was. I think I'm right. I'm trying to remember the sequence, but I think it was a couple of years later.
Yeah, it was 98 for the Avengers and 2000 for Finding Forrester.
Yeah. So, and it was like, yeah, okay, Sean's still got it. You know, it's okay, everybody. We can calm down. You know, the Avengers isn't going to be the one that everybody remembers. You know, it's like he is. You know, he's still Sean Connery. He's still great. And Finding Forrester, I agree. Not a typical Sean Connery movie.
Yeah, that's true. The first movie I remember seeing him in, I think, was definitely Highlander. But then I remember when the Bond movies would come on, and my dad's favorite with Sean Connery was From Russia with Love, and that became one of my favorites as well. And then, of course, I would go back and watch older ones. I loved Bridge to his character, Major General Urquhart in Bridge Too Far. And one of my favorites that's kind of a cult classic is the High Noon in Space movie was Outland that he did.
Yeah.
Outland was great. Loved him, of course, in Untouchables. He was just great as Jim Malone. And I loved him in Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade as Indiana Jones's father. He was so funny in that. And I've never seen him that funny before. You know, and it was really, really refreshing to see him do that. And then after that, you see him in Hunt for Red October as Ramirez, and you're like, my God, you know, this guy's just killing it. You know, he had a great little run there. As you mentioned, I love The Rock. It's a good one there. But when I first saw League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I didn't like it. I didn't get it. But then I watched it on on cable or something one night, and I'm like, okay, it was all right. And then I watched it again on HBO. I was like, okay. And then I ended up buying the freaking DVD. And now it's like a guilty pleasure of mine. As bad as it is, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. It's good.
Here's the thing. If it was actually bad, they wouldn't have taken the same plot and made the first Avengers movie out of it.
This is true, yes.
Down to the red-haired killing machine and the emo goth guy tricking the Doctor into getting mad and destroying the anachronistic boat that everybody's on. I mean, so many little plot points. I mean, you have the American guy who's only good at shooting things. You know, every point that they made in LXG was in the Avengers.
I think the problem with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was everything about it being made. I mean, it's not only one that Sean Connery hated their director. I think Stephen Norrington. Yeah, they just did not. They almost came to blows by all accounts. It was the reason Alan Moore will never put his name on any film that's got any connection to him, because 20th Century Fox got sued for plagiarizing it, and Alan Moore just said, this is. The film doesn't bear that much, comparison to what I originally wrote. Secondly, I wrote the stuff that's, you can check it out yourself. And he was furious with Hollywood for settling that lawsuit and saying, because it taints me. So Connery fell out over it. Alan Moore fell out over it. And it was just it was a film that felt like it was a good idea, a good premise that it felt like all the pieces came in from, if it was one of those written by committee things, where everybody had a slightly different idea on what they wanted it to be. Great idea, some good performers in there, but never, for me, it felt like lots of things coming in at different angles and never quite clicking together. And it was one of the reasons that Connery decided, that's it. I really legitimately don't need to work again now. That's it. I'm done. And, and that was the last film, apart from a very small little thing that he did in Scotland about 10 years ago. Apart from that was his last movie.
I had the urge to watch Untouchables. There was just something about the movie that was calling out to me, and it's after he passed away, and I was just watching that earlier today, and it's just amazing how he just comes in and just kills everything. I mean, not literally, even though he does, but I mean, the scene where he's like, when they have that bus up there by the Canadian border, and they're trying to get one of the guys that's alive to talk, and he goes outside, picks one of the dead guys up and pretends that he's alive and blows his brains out. I love it. It just showed you everything about that Malone was in that scene. Before we wrap this up, I want to get your final thoughts. I just want to mention a few of our Bloody Kings friends there on Bloody Kings and some of their thoughts. Cecilia Smith said that she loved the training montage with Connor, especially when he tips him overboard. Hunt for Red October, The Rock, The First Night, some of her favorite roles. And he said that he reminded her of her dad. And that kind of like, what you said, John, that he was one of those actors that was amazing in whatever role that he was in. I mean, it kind of, there's a theme there. He comes in, he does it, he commands the screen, and no matter how bad the movie is, he's probably going to be good in it, Brian Forrester mentioned, Brian Hanley mentioned Finding Forrester, as well as Donna did. Also a movie I do remember seeing that I liked, Anna Champ said, I love Sean Connery and Michael Caine in The Man Who Would Be King. And
The Man Who Would Be King,
very, very underrated film, actually. Yeah. And Michael Baird said in Highlander 2, the speech he gave Connor and told him the time is now while pounding the globe that was on the desk. I think you made reference to that, Lee. So, yeah. Matthew Goodman said the beach run, which is very cool. Dominic said that the introduction when he jumped over the couple and, when they were making some love, just like you said there, John. My buddy Todd said every scene that he was in was the best, but I do love his fight with the Kurgan. He loved The Hunt for Red October, The Rock, Indiana Jones, and The Last Crusade. And he said that he loved his cameo in Prince of Thieves. I don't know anyone that did not see that film and go, yes, it's Sean Connery. Don't care that he sounds Scottish, but it's Sean Connery. I like the comment that Jason Benyon said. He says, I love when he's dining with Heather just before Kurgan burst in. You get the feeling he's been there regaling for her for hours, and if he wasn't a scrupulous scoundrel, probably would have taken her away from Connor. I guess they kind of alluded to that in the second film, Lee, because he had a way with the ladies. So yeah. I mean, Colleen discovered the magic of Sean Connery when she saw him in Darby O'Gill and in Little People. And last but not least here, Ben Russ says, I love everything about Connery's performance as Ramirez. It's hard to pinpoint a single moment in his presence, as his presence enhances every moment in the film. Even those scenes which don't feature him, he's very good. He gives Highlander a certain mood. 2, he was my King Arthur growing up. I loved him in First Night as a child. Connery was the Arthur in every book that I read. Think about that. Whenever you're reading Arthur, that image comes up. He is the look. That's who he is. And I thought that was a great comment there. So
I can't believe nobody selected Zardoz.
I just want to say, yes, there are people that did shout out Zardoz. And did mention that, and some people said, "Yeah, maybe," but yeah, it's kind of a cult favorite.
The Borat's Mankini, yes,
yes, yes. But as we wrap this up, John, I wanted to first of all thank you for coming on. Appreciate that very, very much, man. And I wanted to ask you one last question here. What kind of impact will Sean Connery's legacy leave us as fans and the film industry and community going forward? Lee, I want to start with you real quick.
I think as fans, given the depth and variety of his acting work, it's actually what I hope is that it allows people to see that their favorite actors can be someone else. That they shouldn't be pigeonholed into certain ideas. I mentioned The Rock earlier. Now, The Rock has always played The Rock. They've never really given him a chance to play something else. But maybe they should. Maybe he could be like the doctor in Medicine Man. Maybe he can be Forrester. And I think that if we can take a look at his entire filmography, not just James Bond, Highlander, The Rock, and The Expendables, where he's just really cool, suave, tough guy. But look at everything that he was able to do. I mean, even Russia House. You look at something like that. Speaking as an actor who gets a lot of work because I get typecast, there's money in it. There's money in being Sean Connery. But if we can look at somebody's career like this and see how vast, man who we've kind of talked to, like always kind of plays himself, but in a different role. If we can, as fans, kind of accept that, I think that would be where I'd like to go. I do think that with the idea of this reboot coming out, taking the character of Ramirez seriously, not only in writing it, but also in casting it, and not just kind of going with a hot name, but recognizing the legacy and the size of shoes that need to be filled. I think those would be where I'd go. And I'd also say that the legacy lives on in Celebrity Jeopardy. That just always kills me every time. I watched so many of those in the last couple of days. Jeopardy. Yes. Shuck it, Trebek.
Oh, that's good. That's so funny.
Splendid.
John, I want to get your thoughts on the legacy of Sean Connery, and where do you think going forward, how fans are going to look back, and how, what kind of stamp did he make with his peers going forward in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, I think on an acting level, the word that comes to mind is longevity. I think he had his career should teach everybody that almost anybody can be the flavor of the month. You look on who was the hottest actor 5 years ago. There's a very good chance they're not working now. There's a handful of people who are popular for a short while and then they just disappear. Connery had that level of charisma that very few, as we said, very few people have. But I don't think he was just. I think it's an element of luck. But he wasn't just. He built a persona, but he also built a body of work. And he moved, from being the young leading man very much into perhaps his strongest work. It was in the mentor roles. Whether it be Highlander, but whether it be The Rock, Rising Sun,
Medicine Man too.
Medicine Man, yeah. So many movies where I would arguably say that while he made an impact, obviously with Bond and as a younger man, that some of my favorite movies are in the latter half of his life and the latter half of his career. And I think he can teach people on the screen. I think he can teach people about that longevity, about the qualities of moving and transitioning through your career. So too many people try and play 20 years younger. I don't think he ever tried to play 20 years younger. He's like, here I am, this is me, enjoy me as I am. And that's it. Again, I don't want to gloss over, he was a controversial figure off screen sometimes, but on screen, he was somebody who I don't see we'll see his like again. But that's fine, because I think he'd probably be the first person to turn around and say, you shouldn't be looking for the next Sean Connery. An actor should come through where sooner or later somebody says, who's going to be the next that person? I don't think anybody's going to be Sean Connery again. And so therefore, nobody should try, but there's lessons to be learned in the choices he made on screen and the charisma he had, the worth that he felt he had, and the breadth of his career. There's good and the bad in there, but he will never be forgotten. He is a one-off. And thankfully, because we live in this kind of age, we have no shortage of time and examples to go through and remember how good he was.
That's a good point. And, when you're talking about where, he excelled in the latter half of his career, and he was able to prove that he wasn't typecast as James Bond. And he was also to prove that he set a tone for a franchise that a lot of people believe is still the best, and just enveloped a role that everyone else that took up the James Bond mantle after him modeled it after him. And when you look at the roles that he took, from the late 70s to the early 80s to the 90s, even up until the 2000s, as we said, he's commanded every single role, but he was very versatile. And it's interesting. You kind of felt like he was taking the roles that he wanted to take. He had certain passions, and one of them was golf. He loved golf, and it was one of the reasons why he didn't become close friends with, Mr. Kurgan himself, because he says, "No, I don't play golf," and that was it.
So Jerry Fisher, the cinematographer on Highlander, told me when I was doing the book that he just said the thing about Connery was he knew his worth, but he didn't have to do anything he didn't want to do, even by the time he was doing Highlander. So if he was going to do it, he was going to get something out of it. It was either going to be a fantastically good time, a good pay packet, a mixture of the two, or something he hadn't done before. And I think that when you are in that level of career, when you are still have half your career to go, you're doing something right.
It's amazing to look, because you obviously, when he did Highlander, you got a nice paycheck and he didn't have to work on it for very long. If you look at the amount of time he spent on both Highlander films and the money he got paid, he worked probably 2 weeks, maybe less, a total of those films. So, but yes, he's definitely left a historical impression for all of us to continue to enjoy for the rest of our lives, and the people that will live beyond us. So, first of all, John, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you.
Always a pleasure.
Especially on short notice. And I thank you for giving us your time. Real quick, though, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do so?
I'm on Twitter as There Goes the Day. You can find me on Facebook, John Mosby. Echochamber.online. I do a lot of reviews for there still. So yeah, and you can find Fearful Symmetry on Amazon. And yeah, I'm ubiquitous. I'm all over the place. So you'll find me even without trying. I'll make sure of that.
Lee, how can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Way of the Way. It's underscore in between the words on Instagram. And reach out to me on Facebook. I'm usually on there somehow.
Great. You can find me, Kevin. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. And of course, please head on over to Bloody Kings Highlander Fandom Group on Facebook. Of course, there we'll get you in there. We're also on under the Fandom Podcast Network umbrella with a bunch of other great shows there. We're also on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter, Bloody Kings Podcast. You can email us at bloodykingspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Again, John, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate you.
Always a pleasure.
All right. I'm Kevin on behalf of Lee and our very special guest, John Mosby. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and join us again next time here on the Fandom Podcast Network for another episode of Bloody Kings, a Highlander podcast. And I will quote Ramirez, "The sensation you are feeling is the quickening. We are the same, McLeod. We are brothers." Goodbye, everyone.